Welcome, everybody. Glad to have you here for episode number 3 in our 4-episode presentation of Science and Spirituality. We continue our discussion today with Joe Mastroleo, who is the author of The Ambient Christ. And I like the subtitle to the book, The Inside Story of God, which we believe is the biblical narrative term for ultimacy. And this ultimacy, or God, is in science, scripture, and spirituality. And we continue the discussion today with you, Mr. Joe. Good to have you with us today.
Good to be back.
Enjoying the discussion. These are great discussions. Anything, and I think the world is so hungry right now, Joe, for any discussions that point to us about the potential for humans to discover the unity of all things, and the fact that we are all of the same source, and therefore we have the potential to turn the complexity of this world into unity. The biblical narrative tells us that the source of unity is spirit, unity of the spirit. And so you have a coin with two sides. One side says complexity. Well, how's that complexity held together in organized manner so that it can function without chaos? Complexity can only exist in an organized, functioning way if it is in unity. And so this is, of course, unity of the spirit. Spirit leads us to light. It has led us in this last discussion of the electric model, electromagnetism, the vibrations. And we might even start out there with just a word or two about someone I found very intriguing that you had brought up. I'd never heard of his work before, but it's Henry Drummond. Maybe you could say a few words about Henry Drummond as we kick this off here.
Yes, last time we began with the notion of cosmology. We said cosmology basically comes in two branches, religious and scientific. They're often spoken of as separate. In fact, when I went to write the book, in applying to different publishers, applying my manuscript to see if they would take it, my book didn't fit into any categories,
Yeah, I know
because it was intercategorical. So, it didn't fit into scientific cosmology. It didn't fit into religious cosmology. And finally, there was no room to check other and say, no, I'm putting the two together for cosmotheology, because people are so used to thinking in categories.
Yeah.
But seeing that there was a nexus that we spoke of last time, and that nexus being light or electromagnetism, I just wanted to mention that the thrust of integration isn't so much modern day. That there was a man by the name of Henry Drummond, who was a Scottish theologian, evangelist, biologist, mathematician. He was a well-rounded individual who, right around the time in the mid-1800s when Charles Darwin came out with his Origin of Species, of course, there was quite a bit of dissent from Christian circles, quite a bit of an uproar, as there was here in the States. People saw that as competing with the creation story. And Drummond had no problem with that. In fact, he wrote a book. It was either a long article or a book. I believe it was a book called The Natural Law in the Spiritual World. Mm-hmm. And it was a brilliant dissertation on how the two were not incompatible with each other, that basically scientific and religious cosmology do not have to be in conflict. And in fact, he delineated how they were not in conflict. And so he was part of the evangelical team of D.L. Moody and I.D. Stanke. And they had him speak on this often at, during these revival meetings. But Drummond was very brilliant. He was the only man in his era that I was aware of that could integrate the two and saw that they were not in conflict.
Yeah, that's again someone who sees these things early and exists on the planet for a while, and then these things continue to bubble up. And this is what we're saying when people ask us, how could we not have already known this about the teachings of Jesus and the apostles? Well,
Mhm.
it's been that way with everything in terms of human consciousness. We've always been evolving and learning and learning. The thing that I think that's most encouraging to me is that it's taking us deeper into an understanding of cosmology, deeper into an understanding of oneness of all people. And so
Yes.
we try to
The-
keep our mind open to all these things. People like Drummond and many others, of course, were castigated, just like people like Meister Eckhart and others who were saying
Yes,
things about formlessness back in 1400 or whatever,
yes, that's right.
had the same problem.
That's right. They were also considered heretics. The,
Yes.
Before we leave Drummond,
Yeah.
his central notion in his natural law in the spiritual world was that the scientific principle of continuity extends from the physical world to the spiritual world, that
Mm,
there's a continuum there. In
yeah.
fact, that's talked about in 1 Corinthians 15. There's the physical, and then there's the spiritual, that one sort of unfolds from the other. So
Yeah.
it's right in the scriptures that there's no discontinuity or compartmentalization. The compartmentalization occurs in dualistic thinking,
Yes.
where the human mind more naturally puts things into categories and silos that basically exist on a continuums, like light energy, for example, or like in reality there is no such thing as scientific cosmology and religious cosmology. Basically, they're one. You just have to figure out how God does it.
Yes. Exactly. Yeah. And
So
that continuity, for example, you mentioned 1 Corinthians 15. In that statement, the natural and the spiritual. Paul also talks about it in terms of form or body, which we have celestial bodies, and we have the concept of a body, and then all the way down to me as a human being, and the trajectory is a dying and rising, a dying and rising. There's this circuit of that which is degenerating and then renewal, degeneration, renewal. This
yeah,
is the cross event. And so, even with the body, or the way that Paul is describing that trajectory, he says, "It is sown, it is raised." It's the same thing. It's not. It's not two. It's a continuity there. It is sown, it is raised. So this physical, spiritual is again everything you've been saying in these episodes, Joe, which is the continuity is kept throughout.
yeah. I mean, the it is sown is a material entity, but because the highest form of matter is spirit, it is then brought to the surface, or at least it unfolds, uh, as the pure essence that it is. It emerges from the prior state. Absolutely.
So I thought, in moving along, then here in this episode, as we continue to talk, you introduced Tesla in the last episode. I wanted to talk about Tesla for a second. Um, he had some terms that I find interesting, um, because I really see some tie-ins with even Eastern narratives as well as the biblical narrative. He came up with this term acacia field, and also what he called prana. Could you just explain just briefly how he defined that, what that meant?
Well, those are terms from the Far Eastern religions, that basically refer to spirit, or what was once known in the Western world as ether.
Hmm.
They all refer to the same thing. In other words, he recognized, he understood. If you want to know the secrets of the universe, he said, study energy, frequency, and vibration. He knew that there was an electromagnetic centrality to creation and the created order, but he also knew there were other forces at play that were even more invisible than that. And I think he made reference to Akasha and Prana along those lines, similar to ether. Now, I'm not exactly sure how he applied them, but I know that that's what the referent was.
Yeah.
In fact, I think he attributed his inspirations. I mean, he had, I believe he had several hundred patents. In fact, he was quite the ladies' man in his time, and was quite the socialite, but he never married. I mean, as a young man, if you see some of his pictures, he was quite handsome. He liked to dress. He liked to eat in the finest restaurants, and he rubbed elbows with the well-heeled. And so he was the most eligible bachelor. But he said that he couldn't marry. He decided that he wouldn't marry because he spent time alone, so much time alone I'll use the term download his ideas.
Mhm.
And he would get them, he would say, in little pieces. They would come over a series of days.
Mhm.
And then he would put them together, and then he would create whatever he was inspired to create. And so he was very aware, as an example of the question you asked me, that there was some, he said that it's as if the creator himself, was an electromagnetic entity. That was
Right.
because he felt this powerful connection between his, what he was called to do and invent. He knew there was some invisible force that was inspiring his creations, and he had many of them. In fact, one of the things he was sort of cheated out of was the Nobel Prize, which was given to Marconi for the invention of the wireless. And right around the time Tesla passed away, there was a court case going on, and it was determined that it was determined by a judge that Marconi had used something like 18 of Tesla's patents to so-called invent the wireless. And so it was one of many things that Tesla wasn't given credit for. As a matter of fact, Tesla once said, long before Marconi, quote unquote, invented the wireless, that the day will come when mankind would be able to hold in the palm of their hand an instrument that they could talk into, talk to somebody from a distance and also see their picture, which
That's
of course he was, this was like in, like 1910.
Right.
You
Right.
know?
Exactly. Well, you can
And
see why
so,
people thought he was crazy in some accounts.
yeah, he was a visionary. He was an electrical genius.
Well, once you see the principles,
Yeah.
that's the point. And he was seeing these principles, and so he began to expand his thinking, which is again what takes someone from being thought of as a quack or on the theological side a heretic into something that eventually everybody says is self-evident. But it's always that beginning thought that's different from the grooves that we have put into our brain that says this is the way these things are. We can't think outside those grooves.
Yeah. Well, being a genius, he certainly thought outside the box. He felt there was a more central place for electricity and electromagnetism in terms of understanding the mystery of it as being central and integral to the universe. And he had an issue with Einstein over that. He said he came up with his own unified field theory, which about 5 years before his death, which was never published. But he was way ahead of his time. As a matter of fact, he did die alone in a hotel room in New York City. And some government agents came in. He was working on an anti-gravity machine at the time, which was basically, he was working on basically a spaceship that could be propelled without loads of fuel, that could have a way of making gravity disappear, so so the machine could be propelled forward and into the vacuum and keep right on going. And all of those plans were confiscated by the government, and there's still classified information today.
That's fascinating.
So he was way ahead of his time. In fact, Einstein had great respect for him. Einstein was once asked in an interview, "What's it like to be the smartest guy on the planet?" And Einstein answered, I don't know. You'll have to ask Nikola Tesla."
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Einstein realized that even though, what's interesting, say a few words, if you would, about how Tesla's electromagnetism models differed from Einstein's theory of relativity.
Well, he believed, if I remember correctly now, I think the difference between Tesla and Einstein was that Tesla felt that the gravitational force,
Yes.
because Einstein was trying to unite all the forces, the nuclear force, Tesla felt that the gravitational force was a byproduct of electromagnetism.
Right.
That it wasn't explainable on another basis that Einstein was explaining it on, and he differed widely from Einstein along those lines. He felt that, again, electromagnetism was more central in, or played a more central role in a unified field theory than gravity, and explained gravity on that basis.
And that brings me to something I find so fascinating. I've talked with you a little bit about this before, and I'd like you to expand on it, but I was watching a show on Nova on public television here in the US, and they were talking about the conundrum of today's quantum physicists and all physicists, and that is that you have the theory of relativity in the macro picture of galaxies and so forth that applies to time and space and gravity and those elements that we just talked about in the theory of relativity. But when you get into the quantum realm, suddenly you have this thing called non-locality, where something that happens stimulus to this side of the galaxy could be immediate to particle on galaxies away, and it supersedes time and space. And so the conundrum today in physics is, how does it appear that there are two different operating systems when it's obvious that you can't separate the subatomic world from the macro world? I mean, we already know those two things are one. They're just studying on different levels, but there's no way to figure out why they operate differently on the macro versus the micro level. And I'm wondering, this vibration theory and the peoples that have put forth these vibration light theories, it seems to me that there might be something there that might rectify that. So could you talk a little bit maybe about your thoughts on that and some of the things you put in the book, specifically about the way the axis mundi and some of these things work?
Well, quantum physics studies big things like general relativity and the universe at large. Quantum physics studies small things, subatomic, the implicate order, the quantum platform or field, the singularity out of which all multiplicity comes. They're two separate and distinct, or they're understood and discussed by history as two separate and distinct branches of physics that have not been reconciled yet. In fact, it's sort of like religious cosmology and scientific cosmology, okay? We're talking about, and my book involves trying to put those two together. I mean, science is not going to replace spirituality. Right. It's never going to explain spirituality entirely because it's a mystery.
Right.
But you can connect the two disciplines and see their nexus. Well, this hasn't happened, with the two branches of physics. And in fact, putting the two together as a unified model, and I think Einstein was making an attempt at this before he died, he was unsuccessful at it, is known as the holy grail of physics.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it's not been done yet. Now, there's a physicist that I name in the book who also thinks outside the box, who also believes the secret to the unified model lies in geometry,
Mm-hmm.
who also understands the role of electromagnetism and the spiral, the energy coming from the 0 point or the tip of the cone. And, he from what I can understand, and I explained it as best I could in my book on chapter on him, his name is Nassim Haramein. Nassim Haramein, he's from Hawaii. He put together a unified model. Now, he's regarded currently the way Einstein was regarded when Einstein first came on the scene. Many people thought Einstein was a quack. He was an unknown. He was working as a clerk in a patent office when he came up with his relativity theory. And people just kind of shook their heads and wondered who this guy was. But eventually people caught on. Okay, now Haramein is regarded, there's two separate camps in terms of how he's regarded. Some people think he's a quack, a madman, and a fraud.
Right.
And other people think he's a genius and he's the next Einstein.
Right. Right.
He's a relatively young man. I think he's maybe in his 40s, around 50 or so. But he has put together a unified model where he shows basically how the phenomenon of time and the timeless can coexist in ways that their tensions are reconciled. And he's not all that hard to understand. You can read about him in my book, but there's a lot of video on him on YouTube, explaining his model.
Right. Yes.
But the secret is, if the human being is a composite, a dynamic tension between the material creation and the invisible order, they are seamlessly co-present and integrated to each other. So the part of us that survives the physical body upon death has to be of a consistency that's in space and time. And I believe that's what consciousness is.
Mm-hmm.
It's in space and time, but it's not of space and time the way the material body is.
Right.
And somehow they're co-present to each other because they know that consciousness survives the body on physical death. There's oodles of data on that with near-death experiences.
Yeah.
So consciousness is not tied to brain function exclusively.
Mm-hmm.
It's part of that non-local
Mm-hmm.
energy field that exists everywhere, like an envelope of mind or energy or consciousness that the brain tunes into, sort of like an antenna tunes into different frequencies that come through your radio or your television.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, sure.
And it participates in that frequency, for consciousness and also for spiritual consciousness. But it's in the body, but it's not of it. It envelops the body. In fact, in medieval art, it's depicted as an aura or a halo.
Yes.
And in some of the chapters, I have pictures of it's called the Taurus Field or the electromagnetic field. It's around every entity from the atom all the way up to every single entity, every organ, every system in your body, the body itself, and I talk about that. But electromagnetism figures very central, and this is part of Tesla's contribution in the created order.
Yeah, and that makes so much sense on a number of levels. That's why, like Danae and I, in the mornings when we're having our coffee, we focus on the fact that everything is connected. So there is non-locality present. We know this from science.
Yeah.
So we're talking about our brains being antenna. so we bring that over into spirituality from the standpoint of what is prayer? What does prayer accomplish? What do you accomplish if you sit and talk about family matters, family individuals within the family, all the way down to grandchildren in a positive way? What possibly is happening on a subatomic level? What happens in prayer when we're basically accessing the source of all vibrations? Is it possible then that prayer really is something that you can begin to have some type of contribution to a positive outcome, some kind of even subconscious vibrating of people you love? It's not even on a conscious level, but you're basically putting out your thoughts and prayers. That's a common phrase among people in Western religion. I put up my thoughts and prayers for you. So it just seems to me that this idea of non-locality, vibrations, the interconnectivity of all things,
That's right.
really does fit into spirituality beautifully.
Yeah, it's having a conscious awareness of your oneness in that presence. I mean, you're connected when you're connected anyway, but when you're consciously aware of that presence and your intersection with it in your deepest, in your marrow, in the axis of your being, okay, that you're united consciously to the universe. In fact, somebody sent me this morning, said they thought of me when they read it, and it's worth taking a second or two to read this because it resonates with what you just said. Somebody said to me, I thought of you when I read this morning, and they sent it. The universe responds to your frequency. It doesn't recognize your personal desires, wants, or needs. It only understands the frequency in which you are vibrating at. For example, if you are vibrating in the frequency of fear, guilt, or shame, you're going to attract things of a similar vibration to support that frequency. If you're vibrating in the frequency of love, joy, and abundance, you're going to attract things to support that frequency. It's like tuning into a radio station. You have to be tuned into the radio station you want to listen to, just like you have to be tuned into the energy you want to manifest in your life. Now, that's known as the law of attraction.
Yeah.
Okay. But, spiritual consciousness is among the higher vibratory fields. And the more you practice being consciously aware of that, the more you participate in basically the axis that runs through the very center of your being, that's connected with the whole axis that runs through the center of everybody else's being in every created thing.
Exactly.
If that's not too complicated.
Yeah, I think the other thing that Danae and I talk about is that we have become more intentional, doing things with intent, because the more we've come to understand the interconnectivity of all things, the more intentional we've been able to become in that type of thinking, Joe. And so you're in the world of therapy, and so you very well know when people come in and they have these problems, perhaps the last thing they would ever think about is that their fear, their shame, their depression, the things they're attracting in their lives have anything to do with the field of science and vibrations, and all the way down to the light from which all things come. That's
right. In fact, I'm convinced that the healing gift that I have, when I'm tuned in, when I've done my homework, when I'm centered, when I'm focused, when I'm involved in active listening, I'm in a vibratory field of consciousness that resonates with the person I'm working with in the area of their difficulty. And that vibratory exchange, I mean, it happens with words, it happens with tone, it happens with visuals, but it's a vibration. And it tends to help resolve and heal and elevate by virtue of the resonance alone. It brings the other, it has a tendency to bring the other person to higher levels of of consciousness, that is, we could say, looking at something differently.
Yeah.
And then being able to embrace that, it raises their, their level of awareness. It moves them up the ladder of, if you will, ordinary consciousness to higher levels of consciousness and looking at themselves, others in the world. But I think it's all about vibrations. I mean, people who tune pianos and guitars know, and to me that was fascinating to learn this because I'm not very musical, that you can take a tuning fork, bing, and you hit it on the table, and you could put it adjacent to a guitar string or a piano string without touching the string. And the string will begin to vibrate at the same frequency as the tuning fork and make the same sound.
Yeah. Yeah. Isn't that amazing?
Okay? And that's how they tune, instruments, so the ones that aren't masters of doing it with their ear. So yeah, vibration, Tesla was right. Energy, frequency, and vibration is part of discovering and knowing the secrets of the universe.
Yeah, and that's why these discussions that we're doing here are, I think, so amazing and so important. And that is because we're taking it down, Joe, to the common everyday struggles that we human beings have. We want to know, okay, I went to school, I took science, it was a subject. But now I go to church and that's a thing. And now it's Monday. And I've got all these problems in my life that I need to go see and talk to Joe about. And I see all of that as separate. Again, I'm not recognizing how much everything emanates from a common source, and that common source comes right through me, just as it did the ambient Christ, and was made manifest in this world, modeled in this world by the ambient Christ to show all of us that all of these things, the more we understand the unity of all things, the more enriched we can be. And therefore, when Jesus said, I come to bring you more abundant life and more abundant life, that the more abundant life comes for me as I learn more and more about the way all things are unified, including my unity consciousness.
Yes, absolutely. When you have a conscious awareness of that presence within yourself, you have a conscious awareness of that presence in everything around you and in every person around you, whether they're aware of it or not.
Yes.
And it's quite, it can be quite profound.
Well, my wife, Danae, is very intuitive and really good at reading people. And everyone knows these phrases that we have that are common to us. For example, someone will say, "Yeah, I just got bad vibes. Yeah, I met this, I did this situation, this person, this group. I just got bad vibes."
Yeah, the hippies were right, Doug.
I think that's what we're trying to get at in this series, Joe. You and I were the generation that really had it, right?
Didn't I see you at Woodstock?
I don't remember.
Yeah, the hippies were right. It's about vibes.
Pardon?
I said the hippies were right. It's about vibes.
It's all about vibes, man. Good vibes, bad vibes.
Yeah, that's right.
Picking up good vibrations. We can go on and on, I guess, with all of this. And apparently they were all sensing something. Well, there's some more I want to say. You've talked a little bit today in this episode about a section of your book, really, that people need to really enjoy. And it's called Architecture of Spirit. And it's got all these things that Joe talked about in this episode. It's got diagrams in there, diagrams of the Taurus Field and diagrams of the aura of the human. And again, the fact that these things always show up in circles and spirals, and the way that this electromagnetism, light, energy, transformation, all of these magic words that happen in our lives are in this book by Joe. So I think next time we get together, because it looks like we've gone our time here, why don't we wrap this thing up with getting into Teilhard, who's really, now you can take us, Joe, to the theological side of your book, which is really bringing home science into theology. Talk about Desjardins next episode, and what you're calling cosmotheology. Does that sound like a good way to wrap it up next week?
Yeah, I think that'll be great. That's a good logical extension of the flow of the book and of our conversation. So I'll be looking forward to that.
Great. Well, then, thanks for tuning in, everybody. We appreciate you checking us out. Get Joe's book, The Ambient Christ, and we will see you next week. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for joining us today. If you have any questions or comments, please contact us at info@presence.tv. You can also visit our website at presence.tv or find us on Facebook. We look forward to hearing from you.